In today's noisy world, filled with endless scrolling, emotional burnout, and mental chaos, where the most powerful answer lies not in reaction, but in stillness? What if true strength isn't about how loudly we speak, but how deeply we think? There once lived a man who ruled the most powerful empire in the world. Yet his greatest ambition wasn't to conquer nations, but to master himself. He was Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who became a philosopher, and the philosopher who became eternal. In this episode of Whispers of Psychology, we'll uncover how Stoic philosophy shaped not only an emperor's mind, but offers timeless psychological tools for modern life. If you've ever felt overwhelmed, emotionally exhausted, or mentally scattered, then this is a story you need to hear. Subscribe, stay present, and let's travel back to a time where power came not from force, but from thought. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 2nd century AD, while Rome stood as the mightiest civilization on earth, it was ruled by a man who spent his nights not celebrating victory, but writing quietly in his journal. His name was Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, a soldier, a ruler, but above all, a Stoic. Now, Stoicism wasn't just a school of thought. It was a way of living, a mental discipline, a spiritual exercise. And Marcus Aurelius lived it not in peaceful temples, but on the front lines of war, during political betrayal, and amidst the death of his children and loved ones. He was not untouched by pain. He was surrounded by it. And yet, he remained steady. But how? Stoicism, at its core, teaches us that we cannot control what happens outside us, but we can always control how we respond within. It teaches us that emotions may scream, but reason must speak louder, that the only true freedom lies in self-control. Marcus wasn't just a thinker of these ideas. He was a living embodiment of them. Where most rulers were obsessed with glory, conquest, and legacy, Marcus obsessed over one thing: virtue. He believed that to live a good life was to live with wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline, regardless of the circumstances. While sitting in cold military tents, far from luxury, he would write down questions, not for others, but for himself. He would ask, how much time do you think you have left? Why are you distracted by things that don't matter? If someone wrongs you, will you be controlled by anger or rise above it? These were not rhetorical. They were reminders, anchors. He knew that the mind left unchecked becomes a tyrant, but a trained mind, a Stoic mind, becomes a shield. Marcus Aurelius saw everything temporary: praise, insults, love, pain, even life itself. And that wasn't depressing to him. It was empowering. Because if everything is temporary, then no hardship can break us unless we allow it. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you'll find strength." And strength, to Marcus, wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't reactive. It was still, measured, quiet. He wasn't attached in the sense of being cold or unfeeling. In fact, his writings showed deep empathy and emotion, but his detachment came from perspective, the ability to step back, breathe, and ask, is this worth my peace? Is this within my control? He trained himself not to suppress emotions, but understand them, and to act according to reason, not impulse. Imagine being the Emperor of Rome, where every word is power, where every mistake has a price, and choosing to respond with humility, calm, and philosophical inquiry. That was the real strength of Marcus Aurelius. Not the armies he led, not the laws he passed, but the mind he governed. Through Stoicism, he learned that everything external is borrowed: wealth, reputation, even life. But what you cultivate within, your reason, your clarity, your virtue, that is yours alone. And that is where true power lives. In the stillness between stimulus and response. In the pause between offense and reaction. In the quiet place where emotions are observed, not obeyed. Marcus Aurelius wasn't trying to impress others. He was trying to live well by mastering himself. And centuries later, his thoughts still resonate because the human condition hasn't changed. Only the noise has increased. And so, when we read his meditations today, we aren't just reading the thoughts of a Roman emperor. We're reading the battle notes of a man who fought his own mind and won. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first Stoic secret of Marcus Aurelius. that the path to power runs inward through stillness, discipline, and self-awareness. Stillness is often misunderstood. Many associate with passivity, silence, or inaction. But for Marcus Aurelius, stillness was none of these. It was not an escape from the world, but a command center within the mind, a psychological space where clarity, strength, and rationality could be cultivated in the middle of chaos. As Emperor of Rome, Marcus lived amidst constant turmoil, wars on the northern frontiers, political plots in the Senate, family betrayal, and personal grief, including the loss of multiple children. And yet, history remembers him not as a ruler broken by pressure, but as one who remained composed, wise, and deeply introspective. That composure didn't come from indifference. It came from practiced stillness. For Marcus, stillness was a deliberate inner practice, one of restraint, reflection, and reason. It was the act of pausing between emotion and reaction. When insulted, instead of retaliating, he would question, "Is this opinion truly mine? Or am I letting someone else govern my peace?" When praised, he reminded himself that admiration was temporary and often unreliable. And when faced with grief or pain, he did not avoid the feeling, but met it head-on with acceptance. This, too, is nature. This ability to remain internally stable in the face of external instability is what made Marcus powerful. Stillness, in his philosophy, was not merely the absence of noise. It was the presence of control. It was a form of mental sovereignty, cultivated through reason, virtue, and daily reflection. He wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." In other words, the greatest refuge was not a fortress, palace, or mountain, but a trained and balanced mind. And this inner calm was not reserved for ideal circumstances. Marcus practiced stillness most during difficulty. On battlefields, amidst plague and death, or in times of despair, he would remind himself that true freedom lies in how we respond. This wasn't denial of reality. It was engagement with it, minus the emotional distortion. Modern psychology echoes this. Cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and emotional regulation all emphasize the value of pausing before reacting, of observing thoughts without becoming them, of choosing a rational response over impulsive emotion. Marcus Aurelius was doing this 2,000 years ago, without clinical terminology, but with philosophical wisdom. Stillness allowed him to delay judgment, to reflect before action, and to govern not just an empire, but his own nervous system. He understood that we are constantly being pulled by desires, fears, and distractions, and unless we establish a still point within, we become slaves to external forces. He didn't pretend to be immune. In fact, his writings show struggle. He often reminded himself to return to reason, to not be pulled into anger or self-pity. He wasn't always composed, but he was always striving, and that's the essence of Stoic practice, to return again and again to inner discipline. The power of stillness, then, lies not in being unaffected, but in being undisturbed, not by suppressing emotion, but by seeing through it, by pausing long enough to ask, is this emotion useful? Is this thought rooted in truth? Or is it just noise? One of the most remarkable things about Marcus Aurelius is that his stillness was active. He was ruling, commanding armies, settling disputes, all while maintaining his philosophical perspective. He didn't escape from responsibility to find peace. He found peace within responsibility. That's what makes his Stoic stillness so relevant today. In a world flooded with noise, news, opinions, conflicts, and constant digital distractions, we are rarely still. Our minds are always reacting, always pulled outward. And in that endless movement, we lose clarity. We forget what matters. We become emotionally exhausted, reactive, even irrational. But Marcus reminds us, true strength is the ability to return to stillness, to a space where we can observe without judgment, choose without pressure, and act with intention. He believed that even if the entire world were crumbling around you, if your mind remained stable, then you were not truly harmed, because the soul, once trained in reason and virtue, becomes unshakable. And this wasn't just theory for him. It was tested in the worst moments of life. When facing death, betrayal, loss, and power, he still returned to that mental still point. He still reminded himself, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. This idea that perception is power is revolutionary, not because it is new, but because it is timeless. Marcus Aurelius practiced it not to escape responsibility, but to sharpen it. He used stillness as a weapon against ego, impulse, and fear. In this sense, stillness is not passivity. It is precision. It is choosing how to feel, how to think, how to be in a world that constantly tries to make those choices for us. Marcus Aurelius proved that real power doesn't come from the throne, the army, or the crowd. It comes from the self, from the calm clarity of a disciplined mind. And in a chaotic world, that is not just power, it is survival. Every day, we wake up into a world that demands our attention. Messages, opinions, fears, expectations. The outer world is constantly shifting, often in ways beyond our control. For Marcus Aurelius, this was not a philosophical idea. It was a lived reality. As Emperor of Rome, his days were filled with challenges that would overwhelm most minds. Invasions threatening the empire, betrayals by those closest to him, the deaths of his children, a devastating plague, and the unrelenting burden of leading millions. But instead of collapsing under the weight of chaos, Marcus turned inward. He trained his mind to become an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. He knew he could not control what others said, did, or thought. He couldn't control the future, the outcome of battles, or even the health of those he loved. But he could control his judgments. He could choose what meaning to assign to events. And that, he believed, was a true battlefield, not the one fought with swords, but the one fought within. One of the most powerful passages from meditation says, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." In other words, we may not choose our circumstances, but we can choose our interpretations, and those interpretations shape who we become. Modern psychology now confirms this. What Marcus called judgment, psychology calls cognitive framing. It's the concept that our emotional experience isn't caused by the event itself, but by how we think about that event. Two people can face the same situation, loss, rejection, hardship, and one collapses while the other grows. The difference is their internal narrative. Marcus wrote to himself not to escape pain, but to clarify his thinking during it. He would ask questions to untangle confusion. Is this truly harmful, or is it simply uncomfortable? He practiced seeing things as they are, not as his fear might distort them. This was not emotionless detachment. It was emotional clarity. He constantly reminded himself that no external event has the power to damage the soul unless we allow it. Not because pain doesn't hurt, but because pain doesn't have to define us. And in that lies the difference between suffering with meaning and suffering in despair. By cultivating this inner strength, Marcus was not avoiding the world. He was facing it more honestly. He refused to lie to himself. When something was difficult, he acknowledged it. When he felt anger, he didn't deny it. He examined it. When things went wrong, as they often did, he asked, "Can I control this? If not, what can I do internally to remain composed?" He practiced what we might now call radical acceptance, the act of letting go of resistance to what already is. This doesn't mean liking everything that happens. It means refusing to be broken by it. Marcus taught himself, again and again, to focus on his own behavior, his own character, and his own choices. Everything else he considered outside his domain. This idea is central to Stoicism, that we divide life into two categories, what is within our control and what is not. And only the first category deserves our energy. Trying to control what cannot be controlled leads to anxiety, resentment, and misery. But focusing on the inner world, our perceptions, our values, our reactions, creates a kind of unshakable peace. In a time when power meant domination, Marcus showed that true mastery was self-mastery. He believed that to be emotionally reactive, to get angry, jealous, bitter, was to give our power away to circumstances. But to remain centered, to act with reason even when provoked, that was real strength. Imagine the level of discipline it takes to be Emperor of Rome and still right to yourself. Do not be overheard complaining, not even to yourself. He was not immune to stress, but he was committed to meeting that stress with clarity. He believed the greatest victory wasn't over other people, but over the part of the self that wanted to indulge in chaos. In today's world, where external noise is louder than ever, media, opinions, arguments, and uncertainty, this teaching is more relevant than ever. We cannot stop the storm, but we can train our mind to remain steady inside it. Controlling the inner world doesn't mean living in denial. It means acknowledging reality without becoming reactive to it. It means developing the ability to pause, reflect, and choose a response that aligns with our values, not our temporary emotions. Marcus Aurelius lived in a time of swords and plague. We live in a time of screens and overstimulation, but the principle remains the same. Our inner world is our only true domain. If we fail to master it, we become prisoners of every external shift. If we succeed in mastering it, we become free, no matter what happens outside. That is why Marcus trained daily, not on battlefields, but within himself. Every morning, he would prepare his mind for insult, pain, disappointment, and change. Not to become cynical, but to become calm. Not to expect the worst, but to be unshaken by it. And in that preparation, in that quiet confrontation with reality, he found a kind of invincibility that no crown, army, or law could ever provide. In today's fast-paced, emotionally overstimulated world, many people find themselves lost in thought loops, paralyzed by overthinking, or consumed by emotional exhaustion. Despite all the modern comforts, technology, and information we have at our fingertips, inner peace feels distant. We are more connected than ever, but often feel more anxious, more distracted, and more mentally fatigued. And this is where the ancient wisdom of Marcus Aurelius feels remarkably current. Though he lived nearly 2,000 years ago, his writings anticipate many of the same emotional and psychological struggles we face today. The pressure of expectations, the fear of failure, the pull of comparison, the unpredictability of life, and the challenge of controlling our reactions in a world filled with conflict. One of Marcus's central teachings, that we must focus only on what we can control, mirrors the foundation of modern therapeutic practices. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, patients are taught to separate facts from distorted thinking, to question their automatic thoughts, and to challenge irrational beliefs. Marcus was doing this long before it had a name, when he wrote things like, "Today I escaped from anxiety," or "No, I discarded it, because it was within me in my own perceptions, not outside." He was engaging in a kind of internal dialogue that allowed him to reframe and diffuse emotional tension. In modern psychology, this is called cognitive distancing, the ability to observe thoughts as mental events, not absolute truths. Marcus constantly practiced this by writing to himself, reviewing his judgments, and reminding himself that the source of his disturbance was not the event itself, but his interpretation of it. We live in an age of emotional reactivity. One tweet, one comment. One glance can send us spiraling into anger, sadness, or shame. But Marcus urged something radically different. Pause, observe, question. He trained himself to delay judgment and to separate the stimulus from the response. And he often reminded himself that most things we obsess over are, in the grand scheme of time and nature, insignificant. This kind of perspective is emotionally freeing. It allows the mind to unhook from petty concerns and instead return to values, to integrity, reason, and balance. Marcus's approach wasn't about emotional suppression. It was about emotional regulation. He didn't deny sadness, fear, or frustration. He simply refused to be ruled by them. In moments of stress, modern individuals often seek distraction, scrolling, consuming, escaping. Marcus did the opposite. He turned inward. He examined the discomfort, sat with it, and asked what could be learned. He believed that every emotional experience, even pain, was a chance to grow in wisdom and character. And this aligns with the principles of emotional intelligence today, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage one's own emotions in healthy and constructive ways. Mental resilience is another area where Marcus's Stoicism intersects with contemporary psychology. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from setbacks, not by pretending things are fine, but by facing adversity with clarity and strength. Marcus faced the deaths of his children, the betrayal of allies, and the immense pressure of ruling an empire in decline. And yet, in the midst of it all, he continued to write reflections like, "To love only what happens, what was destined. No greater harmony." That level of acceptance is not passive resignation. It's an active, courageous engagement with reality. It's the psychological equivalent of standing in the storm, eyes open, refusing to flinch. Marcus didn't believe in controlling outcomes, only in controlling his effort, his attitude, and his choices. And this mindset fosters incredible psychological stability. When we stop trying to control everything around us and focus instead on how we respond, we reclaim a deep sense of agency. Even more relevant is Marcus's resistance to external validation. In a time where social comparison and public approval dominate our mental space, whether through social media, professional pressure, or cultural standards, Marcus reminded himself daily that the opinions of others are fleeting and often misguided. He believed that true peace could only be found in living according to one's values, not in chasing reputation. This detachment from approval-seeking behavior is psychologically liberating. It reduces anxiety, boosts authenticity, and anchors one in purpose. Marcus advised himself to act rightly, not to be praised, but because it is right. And that inner moral compass, guided by reason and virtue, gave him the freedom to live truthfully, even in a world that demanded masks and manipulation. Perhaps one of the most modern aspects of Marcus's philosophy is his attention to mortality. In a culture obsessed with youth, permanence, and control, Marcus repeatedly reflected on death, not to frighten himself, but to sharpen his awareness of time. He used mortality as a motivator to stay present, to simplify life, and to avoid wasting precious attention on trivialities. In psychological terms, this is existential mindfulness, the ability to live fully by recognizing the finiteness of life. He reminded himself often, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This wasn't morbid. It was clarifying. It allowed him to let go of vanity, pettiness, and worry, and focus on what truly mattered, being just thoughtful, courageous, and kind. Marcus Aurelius was not superhuman. He struggled, doubted, grieved, and feared. But what makes his teaching so powerful today is that he didn't try to escape these experiences. He engaged with them philosophically. He turned pain into perspective. He turned chaos into clarity. He turned the uncontrollable world around him into an opportunity for inner mastery. In this way, Marcus Aurelius remains not just a historical figure, but a psychological guide, offering us not a cure for suffering, but a framework for enduring it with grace, dignity, and strength. And so, in the silence of his tent, under the weight of empire and grief, Marcus Aurelius wrote, not to impress the world, but to discipline his soul. What we discover in his words is not the voice of a ruler giving commands, but of a human asking honest questions. Questions about how to live well, how to suffer meaningfully, how to stay calm in disorder, and how to remain virtuous when the world invites anything but virtue. Through Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius found clarity where most would lose themselves. He found strength not in power, but in perspective. He mastered the battlefield of the mind, where fear, desire, ego, and pain constantly fight for dominance. He taught that the only empire truly worth ruling is the one within. We've explored how philosophy was not abstract theory, but applied practice, a living psychology. We've seen how stillness wasn't passivity, but presence. How inner control gave him strength in external chaos. How emotional clarity became his shield and reason his sword. And in a modern world drowning in information, overstimulation, and distraction, Marcus's insights are more than ancient wisdom. They are tools. Tools we can use to reclaim our attention, protect our peace, and live with meaning. He reminds us that we do not choose our circumstances, but we always choose our response. That we cannot control the outer world, but we can control the way we meet it, with reason, with reflection, and above all, with stillness. So the next time you find yourself overwhelmed, anxious, or lost in noise, remember the emperor who ruled with thought, not force, who remained calm in chaos, who faced death, betrayal, and sorrow, and still chose virtue over emotion. His whispers echo through time, not as commands, but as invitations, to master the mind, to honor the present, to seek strength, not in reaction, but in restraint. And in that stillness, find freedom.